Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this legal compliance update run by Kaizen Synergy Law Firm. My name is Nihal Samara. I'm the General Counsel and Legal Director of Kaizen Synergy Law Firm, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's session. This session really focuses on the vaccination registers and also some of the laws that surround vaccinations within the workplace. We will be focusing also on the COVID Safe dashboard that Gemba 360 has been using to support agencies as well. And more than happy in this webinar to actually open up the phone lines, take any questions that you might have around the legal compliance obligations of vaccinations and how these work, what the impacts are for agencies and the like. So with this webinar is being recorded all the way through to the question and answer part of the session, where we will switch off the recording, but more than happy specifically for this webinar to actually field any questions that you might have as we go through it. Now, with it, as always, we'd like to pay our respects to the elders past and present upon the lands on which we all meet. While this session is being run by webinar, we do pay our respects to the traditional owners accordingly. So today's agenda, we are going to be covering off some of the key vaccination rules that workplaces and agencies, specifically not-for-profit agencies around the country should know and follow. We have, over the last few weeks, just reached out to agencies that have already registered to see if there were specific questions that you wanted answered today. And some of these are listed here. And we will be covering off each and every one of these questions throughout the session. Running through them, we're looking at what if some of the employees don't want to be vaccinated? What's the impact of that? What if all the support workers want to be vaccinated, and what is the reasoning behind that for agencies? There's also a question in relation to respecting people's privacy, and do you need to ask people if they want to be vaccinated in the first place as well? And also, what are the legal obligations of requiring employees to inform yourselves about their vaccination history? And that includes whether you have existing staff or new staff that are joining your agency. We're also going to discuss what you actually put on the agency risk registers. Now, a lot of agencies run risk registers in compliance with the updated ISO standards and the likes. And one of the questions is, what do we actually put in and how do we actually manage this risk as well? We have had some broader questions like about contact tracing work and how it works as well, but certainly we'll cover these off as we move forward in today's webinar. Now, one of the documentations that we will refer to from time to time is the Australian COVID-19 vaccination policy. And this essentially provides guidelines on what the position is for the Commonwealth Government, how they plan on rolling the vaccination program out, who is covered, who are the priority groups, and also where are some of the vaccination hubs that they're talking about as well too. But we will come back to this and refer to it throughout the session. We will also send you a copy of this document in today's webinar as well too. Now, one of the things that we do need to be mindful of is that lockdowns will be a part of life. And this is a tool that we've mentioned in the past webinars that the state and Commonwealth governments will actually be using throughout really 2021 in terms of their vaccination programs and how these would actually work for them. And if there were outbreaks, how are they intending to actually manage these parts of the, I'm going to call the problems and outbreaks with COVID-19 as well too. So they have been very, very clear that this is going to be an ongoing part of their tools that they'll in fact use throughout this year. And that is until they say everyone is vaccinated around, or majority of people are. So really, one of the things I wanted to be quite clear on from the start is from attending this webinar, you should get a list of resources, including copies of this presentation, along with the slides and other reference material that I will be talking about and using, and also get a better understanding of the COVID rules and how they apply to your agency, as well as improve your awareness of some of the HR rules that you also need to consider. And from that, also see what other COVID safe systems other agencies are doing and what they've done over the past few months to implement some of the things that we're talking about here. Now, just a few housekeeping items, just as we do with all of our legal compliance webinars. This webinar is being recorded up to the Q&A part of the session. If you do have any questions, then by all means, please use the questions panel or chat box to post any messages that you want raised. We will certainly come back to you on these and look at including these in the session as we go through. The webinars are also published on our Gemba 360 YouTube channel, along with all materials included as part of our weekly circulars for your reference as well too. And you can access these, specifically the COVID safe webinars, directly on the YouTube channel that you can see in front of you under Gemba 360. And we've got a list of all our past webinars that we've run, especially around COVID safe, since February 2020. Now, with it, we also have our Knowledge Hub and Knowledge Base on our website, where you can get these past materials as well. And you will also access your Gemba 360 COVID Safe dashboard by clicking on this button here, and that will take you directly into the blue circle that I just showed you before as well. So with it, you do have a list of all of these resources that we will be sending out to you. If you do have any questions after today's session, or if you are listening to this webinar online and via the e-learning hub, then by all means, please reach out to us on 1300 360 360. You can contact me directly on my mobile, which is listed here as 0413 699 515, or email me directly around any questions that you might have, specifically around the legal compliance update. Now, one of the things we will be referring to is around employees, but this does include members, volunteers, and board members within your agency as well. One of the things that is important is around just ensuring you've got the systems in place to manage your registers for your vaccination registers that you do have. And I'll cover the legal compliance obligations that you need to consider, and also come back to this screen as well. Now, with it, it is important as part of this, and we will come to it, that in your COVID safe Gemba 360 dashboard, you do have access to an HR space to actually manage your vaccination registers, and also all of your employee members, volunteers, and board members' information as well, to ensure that you meet your legal compliance obligations. Now, just a brief introduction, because we've got a large number of new agencies joining us again this week. Just a brief introduction of who we are and what we do. Certainly, Kaizen Synergy Law Firm has been providing legal compliance services for well over 10 years now, and part of that is our Gemba 360 legal compliance dashboard. Since last year, we've onboarded over 4,000 companies around their COVID safe plan, and some of the tools that I'm going to show you is actually coming out of their agencies' dashboards and what they've done in terms of meeting their compliance obligations. We're very proud to say that in 2013, we received a NAIDOC award by the Aboriginal Community Services, and with it, it was for above and beyond the call of duty, as well as being, our works have been published across the Dubai International Emergency Disaster Conference back in 2000, when we actually published and were the opening speaker at the international conference on compliance and pandemics, and this is going back some years ago. We have also been, journals have also been reviewed via, our works have also been reviewed via international journals and also peer-reviewed journals here in Australia, for example, leading journals like Computers and the Law as well too. So we do have a long history in the legal compliance space. We will also refer to the Gemba 360 platform, and it is our law firm's legal compliance and risk management system, and it is essentially a mobile system that allows you to manage all of your governance, legal compliance and risks from one dashboard, and it's a single source of truth for you to use. That said, today's agenda, we're going to be covering off these specific questions and really looking at what are the rules surrounding vaccination requirements and registers. Now, there are a number of new rules that have applied, and these have really come and been reviewed by Fair Work as well. Now, when we look at the workplace, we are not talking just of employees only here. We will use these terms slightly interchangeably in today's webinar, and it's a one point in time that we do such a thing. And with it, we do talk of employees, volunteers, members, and board members. And particularly, I think it's important in the not-for-profit sector that we just get our bearings around some of these, because especially for charities where it's not just employees, but you may have a large volunteer network. You may also have, being charities, members and board members that essentially all provide support and services to your agency. So in this case, we have, I'm going to say, broadened the net of who we're actually talking about in terms of vaccinations and the likes, because obviously members being involved in your agency or volunteers that may go out and deliver services on behalf of your agency, you do need to consider what their roles are when we're talking about vaccinations, and I'll come to this in a minute. So essentially, one of the parts that's important within the not-for-profit sector is to look at the workplace. And it's very easy when we talk of vaccinations to put that at what I'll say is almost arm's distance, where you say, right, we have it is essentially a person's decision, and it is an employee and employer type of relationship. Now, that worked well in the private or for-profit sector, but it actually causes quite a degree of confusion in the not-for-profit sector, because the workplace brings together, as I've mentioned, staff members of employees, volunteers, members and board members that are all in fact congregating around your agency. So both from an agency point, there is the need to seek clarity on workplace rights and obligations around COVID-19 vaccines as they become available in Australia. And this is why today's webinar has been so popular. Now, there are currently no laws or public health orders in Australia that specifically enable employers to require their employees to be vaccinated against coronavirus. And building on what we had spoken about over the past few weeks now, the Australian government's policy is that receiving a vaccination is voluntary, although it aims to have as many vaccinated Australians as possible. Now, there are limited circumstances when an employer may require their employees to be vaccinated. And this has been one of the questions that has come up. Now, relevant factors to include to consider are what is the specific law and state which may require employees to be vaccinated, but also is there a current enterprise agreement or other contract that you might have in place about vaccinations? And if there isn't any law agreement or employment contract that applies that requires vaccination, then really it is a covered by lawful and reasonable directions of the agency or the employer to give their employees direction on vaccinations itself. And this is really going to be assessed on a case-by-case basis. Now, as part of that, there are specific demographic groups that are at much more high risk in terms of vaccinations. And we have already advised agencies that those staff that are in high risk situations should actually consider them to be vaccinated as part of this process. Now, equally, there may well be a broad number of staff that simply don't have contact with these high-risk clients, or they may not be high-risk themselves, and potentially may be excluded out of that first wave of groups that you need to be vaccinated itself. So there is some flexibility in these decisions, and we've been working with agencies around developing this policy. Now, that said, can you as an agency require an employee to provide evidence that they have been vaccinated? Now, if an employer has provided a lawful and reasonable direction, as I've just mentioned, for an employee to be vaccinated, the employer could actually ask your employees to provide evidence of that vaccination. And this evidence can be in the form of a doctor's certificate, or it could be in the form of some other documentation that you might ask them to provide to you. And you are, in fact, in your right to be able to do this. Now, directing an employee to provide evidence of their vaccination is definitely likely to raise a number of privacy issues. So this is where it is actually important that you consider how you actually manage a person's information. And one of the things that we have suggested that you do is, in fact, keep a register of a person's HR information, specifically around the COVID safe obligations. And one of the ways to, in fact, do that is to ensure that you meet your requirements by essentially, and I'll just bring this up for you, you can use the your Gemba 360 dashboard when you log in. And this is one of our test sites. You'll see you've got the HR button here, and this will essentially take you into your own HR profile. And you can then jump in, and if we look at the people that we have and just my info, then you can essentially keep it as a attachment of the information that you're keeping, as well as, and you can see we've also listed other information like bushfire information and the likes, but also other parts of the vaccination registers. And you can actually create the vaccination register and have this on here directly. And what this allows you to do, especially if you're a not-for-profit organization, and we've got thousands of agencies using this, is to give access to your staff members, your volunteers, your members and board members to add their own information into this space, because it is their own profile that they're actually adding in. And this way your agency has information all in one spot, which is actually critically important for you to, in fact, view. Now, that said, what happens if an employee refuses to be vaccinated? Now, if an employee refuses to be vaccinated, or after receiving clear and repeated lawful and reasonable direction, then essentially you need to see what that reason is. And it is unlikely that you can actually have stand downs in this circumstance, and Fair Work have been very, very clear about this, but only if the employee has provided a legitimate reason for not being vaccinated. That is, that they've got a pre-existing medical condition, or they've got some other condition that they might have, and you need to make sure that you also don't discriminate against them as well. Now, if an employer refuses to be vaccinated, can you require evidence about why they refuse to be vaccinated? So this is the double negative around this. And the short answer is yes, you can, but essentially what you need to be able to do is to record this information about why that has actually occurred. Now, the reason that we say it is important to actually record why this has occurred is because it is difficult to take disciplinary action because it's not mandatory that that essentially occurs. What you do need to do is essentially get some legal advice around this, and this is what Fair Work have said, in terms of how you manage this process. Directing an employee to provide evidence of a medical reason for refusing a vaccination is likely to raise some privacy issues around it. So essentially how you can do this is to ask them for their reason for the refusal in terms of meeting your work health and safety obligations. Now, one of the other questions that were also raised was, can an employee refuse to attend the workplace because a co-worker isn't vaccinated against the coronavirus? And the short answer is no, they can't be, because vaccination is not mandatory and most workplaces won't be able to require their employees to be vaccinated. So for that reason, you can't actually refuse, an employee can't actually refuse to attend the workplace for that reason. Now, again, the other area that people have asked us questions on is, can an employer take disciplinary action if an employee refuses to be vaccinated? And again, in this case, an agency may be able to take disciplinary action, including termination of employment against an employee for refusing to be vaccinated if the employee's refusal is in breach of a specific law or a clear and repeated lawful and reasonable direction requiring vaccination. And this is a slightly different view. And this is something that Fair Work have been quite clear on. Now, what it is around clear and repeated lawful reasonable direction, that's quite grey at this stage. But it's essentially something that you can do, and it will vary from agency to agency. Now, as part of this, there is anti-discrimination laws that you also need to be conscious of. And this is where we start to talk of the risk registers that your agency might also have. And what we mean here when we talk of the risk registers is we generally will have agencies that will fill out essentially their risk register to include one or more of these criteria. And with it, it'll cover off, is anyone covered by any anti-discrimination laws around it? And so with it, one of these areas is around understanding that there are some people that have protected characteristics that will need careful consideration in your policy document. And I'll talk about what a policy document should look like. Essentially, for those requiring to be vaccinated, they may have protected characteristics. For example, they may have a disability, they may be pregnant, or specific religious beliefs are just three of those that you need to consider in terms of mandatory vaccination policies. So where we then lead to is essentially agencies then go to us, well, who should we actually include? Who is the group that we should actually be carefully considering as part of our vaccination process or procedure? And essentially the people that we should be considering are, and this is pulled directly from the Commonwealth's policy document, is those that are at an increased risk of exposure and hence being infected with the COVID-19 virus. And those include disability workers, people in settings where the risk of the virus transmission is increased, for example, in meat packaging and health and community services, which may also include the quarantine workers clearly as well too. Those who have an increased risk relative to others, so for example, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, older people, and people with underlying select medical conditions should also be carefully considered. Now, those working in services critical to societal functions, including specific occupations and emergency services, would also be covered. So this is where we start to say, for your agency, start developing a vaccination policy around this. And we can see that we've started to work with some agencies around how and what they need to do. Now, in this case, Rumbalara Aboriginal Cooperative, and we thank Laurie Seville out there, and Women's Housing Limited, Judy Lyne, the Chief Executive Officer, again, have started to look at some of these questions. Now, the other component around vaccination registers is daily attestation forms. Now, this is something that the Department of Health and Human Services have raised. Now, somebody asked us a question about contact tracing and where does that fit in with vaccination registers. Now, one of the things that staff need to do is essentially provide a daily attestation that they are COVID symptom free. Now, what that essentially looks like and is essentially that before people actually provide services, that they're assessing, it can be a self-assessment, that they are in fact COVID safe. Now, this is just an example of one of the forms that we have loaded on here, and I'll just refresh the page for us as well too, so that we can actually log in. And with this, what you'll be able to see is the type of form that is in fact used as part of the assessment that you have for the GEMBA dashboard. And the assessment form allows you to essentially run your COVID safe assessments that you have. And the daily assessment form, what it brings up is an assessment that essentially gives you the ability to assess whether staff have met their key obligations. And with it, let me bring this up for you, and here it is here. So the attestation registers as required by the department shows you who needs to complete it. It comes up with their name, their details, and the date and the time. It also gives you, as part of that, the assessment to say, hey, look, this person has done all of their requirements that they need to meet as well. And you then also have the details to say, hey, look, they have, as part of this process, also met their key obligations as part of your compliance obligations that you also need to meet as well. And it is something that agencies do need to consider. Now, what this in fact looks like is when you actually click on your dashboard, and you can see that Rumballara have a list of all of their pandemic forms listed down the side, and essentially their policy documents then appear as part within their GEMBA docs of what they need to do and when. And this will include this particular policy as we move through it. For agencies like Women's Housing, they've also moved to it where they can access it via a mobile site as well too, and essentially can complete their forms on the dashboard. And it gives them a single point of access for their vaccination and also their staff attestation forms and risk registers as well. So we do encourage you to jump into your GEMBA dashboards today. What we do recommend is that you do review your COVID safe policies, especially based on the slides that we've sent you today. If you do have any questions, then by all means, please contact our law firm on the numbers listed here, or you can email us directly. On Thursday this week, we will be looking at specific client relationship systems and what documentation you need to consider for your vaccination and registers of clients as well. And that is something that we will be covering off on Thursday this week. We will open up the phone lines and stay on the line and answer any questions that you might have. If you are listening and watching this recording after today's live session and you do have any questions, then by all means, please contact us on 1300 360 360, or you can email us at support@gemba360.com.